It's my turn, right?
Hey, what is going on, everybody, and welcome to Fantasia. For today, we're going to be jumping into another session of Epic 7 out today. Got some more first impressions for you guys. This time around, we're going to be taking a look at Estelle, who is going to be one of the first RGB knights released in quite a while, I'd say. I can't even remember the last time they released an RGB knight here, but she is going to be of the earth element, as you can see, and boy oh boy are they going all in with the animations nowadays, right? Just compare Closer Charles, who was released back in the day, an ML 5-star, with an RGB 5-star released in 2026. This is crazy. Her animations are so good, and look at all these artworks that are coming along with the story, right? This is gonna be great. Definitely liking the new direction that they're taking in terms of the character development and the story as well. Her design reminds me of Rin, Kagamine Rin. Speaking of which, Kagamine Rin's stat line here, we have quite a decent amount of bulk, really high HP. Defense is kind of middling here. Estelle is going to be a Earth Elemental Knight of the Sagittarius star sign, which we'll talk about in just a second. Base speed relatively low, pretty low actually, I should say. 104 speed is nothing to write home about, and no awakenings into crit chance, crit damage, effectiveness, or effect resistance. However, she does have a team imprint for effect res and a self imprint for HP, making her a relatively defensive knight, a defensive character, right? Now, if you're wondering, like, oh, well, Azza, what units can we compare her to? Well, I'm glad you asked. One unit in particular is going to be a collaboration unit, Albedo. Albedo actually is a Earth Sagittarius Knight, easily built to like 30k health with decent speed, right? It's not like she has nothing to work with here. On a speed set, you can even squeeze out a little bit of effectiveness, which could obviously be effect resistance as well. Defense, of course, kind of a middling stat here. You really want to focus on health. Another unit is Yoha. Again, middling defense, right? Sitting around 1400 defense in most cases with 30k plus HP. You've seen Yoha's obviously go up to like 32, 34k HP before as well, depending on the boot set you're running. You can also run counter set, right? HP sets and stuff. There's a lot of versatility with this star sign and this class. And you can see you can also run a mix of effectiveness and effect res with not a ton of hits to your speed or HP here, given that I'm running a counter set, right? You get no stats from a counter set too. But yeah, we're definitely going to be taking a look at Estelle really closely here, especially as we get into her kit, because I think that'll give us insight into how she's going to be played. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and dive into that here with her skill 2, Protective Nature. At the start of the first battle, gains 50 fighting spirit and grants 30% damage sharing from the damage received by the ally. Now this damage sharing can, with the skill enhancement here, get up to 40%, right? With the 10% extra damage sharing you can get. And after an ally, except for the caster, is attacked, when the damage suffered is 20% or more of their max health, dispels all debuffs from the caster and counter attacks. So this skill cannot be triggered by extra attacks or counter attacks. So ML Bologna's S2, for example, can't trigger this. This is kind of a crazy ability, especially if you pair her with specific units, namely units that are kind of like lower on the HP threshold, right? So it's easier to get that damage onto them. Or against high burst damage units. I was gonna say, she does seem like quite a anti-cleave unit, right? So you can see here, the damage here exceeds Lethe's HP by more than 20%. We're gonna get that cleanse, get that counter. No debuffs here, so really no cleansing is going to be applied. But yeah, look at that. She also inflicts injury, which we'll talk about once we get to her actual attacks. Skill 3, the Dazzling Strike, attacks the enemy with a shield, inflicting up to 20% injuries and recovering health of the caster. Penetrates the target's defense by 50%. A successful attack always results in a critical hit, and the amount recovered and damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's max health. So, huge thing here is that without any crit or crit damage awakenings, you will always be critting. Now, if your crits are gonna have good multipliers, then you're probably gonna want to build some crit damage on her too. But the fact that you don't have to build any crit rate is actually really nice. And the fact that she cleanses herself means you probably don't need to build a ton of resistance. It might be good to have a little bit on her though, just in case your opponent isn't hitting you for that threshold, right? If they're going up against some control team or whatever, chipping away at you, you might want to have something to protect against, you know, at least basic stuns and things from Soul Weavers, basic fears from Lady of the Scales, and those kind of shenanigans, right? Keep in mind her skill 3 also gains 50 fighting spirit, so this in conjunction with her already starting base 50 fighting spirit, gonna get you full fighting spirit. And her Soul Burn also decreases skill cooldowns by 2 turns, very similar to how Albedo's Soul Burn works on her skill 3, right? So yeah, amazing animations, by the way. Just look at the amount of detail they put into this. It's absolutely crazy. But yeah, that's oh wow, that's actually, hang on, let's go back here. Look at that damage. That's actually a decent amount of damage. Look at that. And she's healing quite a bit too. Now she heals proportional to her own HP. So she's healing almost 7k at around 34,000 health. So that is something to keep in mind. Her scaling for her healing is pretty decent. Alright, her skill 1 though, her Shield Strike, attacks the enemy inflicting up to 10% injuries and recovering the caster's health. A successful attack will always result in a critical hit. The amount recovered and the damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's max health. When it's not the caster's turn, damage dealt and injuries are doubled. For example, when she counterattacks. After attacking, when Fighting Spirit is full, consumes all Fighting Spirit to activate Wind of Protection. Wind of Protection allows her to grant a barrier proportional to her max health to all allies for 2 turns, and increases combat readiness of the caster by 35%. So this is actually not bad at all, I'll be honest. The main thing with this is that you can run her with a counter set, because the fact that you double the amount that you're doing, right? Damage dealt and the injury is doubled, which is really good for her because you definitely want to deal damage, obviously, especially if you're against squishier units, you know, if you're using her in an anti-cleave type of team. But also, the more you counter, the more fighting spirit you gain. You gain 25 fighting spirit, right? So starting with 50, you can either counter twice and get this, or you can just rip your skill 3 and get, you know, the 50 fighting spirit there that you need. The main thing is, though, is that this active skill, right, after attacking when the fighting spirit's full, consumes all fighting spirit to activate Wind of Protection. That's not part of her passive, which is important to note. This is actually part of her skill. So I believe if you use your skill 3 and you get to 100 fighting spirit, I don't think it procs immediately. You have to use your skill 1 to proc it. We'll see in the combat demo. I'll clarify that later. But from what I can tell by reading the effects, if you get sealed by New Moon Luna, you can still activate this passive ability, which is actually pretty decent. Although in most cases, if you're sealed by New Moon Luna, you're not going to get a barrier because you're unbuffable. But hey, at least you get to turn cycle with the combat readiness, right? And that kind of brings me to the conclusion that you don't need a ton of speed. You don't need to be like 200 plus speed. Build her bulky with some crit damage, I think, is going to be pretty decent. Counter set is definitely viable on her, I think, right? You can see here she's going to be countering, right? Good amount of damage. Look at that. That's a decent barrier, I'm gonna say. That's not a bad barrier. The fact that you can see a visible barrier on like Leafy and Maid and Schneel, who are all relatively high HP units, right? The fact that you can see the barrier on there is really good. And she, of course, does turn cycle, which allows you to potentially cut. So if your opponent attacks you with like a Rinnock or something as an opener, you can potentially jump up in combat readiness and take the turn if you're fast enough, but we'll talk about that later. Artifact introduction. Let's go ahead and take a look at her new artifact here. It's a night exclusive artifact called With a Little Friend. This artifact will increase your max HP by 5 to 10%. At plus 15, it's going to increase by 7.5%. Always the middle between these two, right? And this is actually a crazy effect where this artifact will decrease the damage received from damage sharing by 25 to 50%. At plus 15, it's going to be 37.5%, right? That is incredibly good. I know a lot of people are kind of hyping this up as like a huge Lady of the Scales buff, and then the other people are like, Lady of the Scales, doesn't matter, you're taking damage from too many sources, you're still not, you know, this is not going to be game breaking. if you Rinnoc skill 2, skill 3 into somebody that's in the front line of a Lady of the Scales team, you're going to be dealing, at least mine, typically deals around 31k damage, which is enough to one-shot something like a Genesis Raz, for example, right? If you have a Katie on your team, which is good. With this, Genesis Raz can live, so you no longer have the reliable, like, Hakati, Rinnoc nuke, at least for things like Guild Wars, just randomly. I know there's better artifacts to run on Genesis Raz's stuff, but this is not a bad one, in case you're pairing them up in defense teams, which is something that people should definitely keep in mind, right? In RTA, it is a little trickier to pull off because you need someone who has damage sharing in their passive for this to be a good thing, because you can't pair this with Aureus, right? Aureus is the most common knight artifact, damage sharing and all that good stuff, so that is a really, really good artifact, and definitely you want to keep multiples if you grab multiples, right, from the banner and from the powder shop. But she is going to be available through drop rate up starting April 30th, so next week, tomorrow we're actually going to get Salome that's going to be available, so if you guys don't want to miss out on Salome and her summons and showcase, then do be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. So now that we know what Estelle's artifact does, and I think it's really good for her, definitely gonna be one of the best in slot options for her, right? Because in her kit, she does help with damage mitigation, and so having something like that that reduces the amount that she takes is going to be amazing for her staying alive, right? And she also has some healing and sustain in her kit. I think there's just a ton of synergy going on there. However, if you wanted to run some other options, for example, like resistance, obviously Bastion of Hope is an option, Proof of Valor to just make her absolutely tanky on the front lines when people are trying to focus her down, perhaps. Maybe people are not trying to touch the other units that are on your team and they're specifically trying to focus her down. Proof of Valor might be a little way to kind of juke out your opponent there, right? When they're focusing her, it's going to be more difficult, and they're not focusing your teammates. It's kind of like what Albedo does, just inherently. No one wants to crit Albedo's teammates, so she procs her passive, so they try to focus Albedo down first, right? And I think that's going to be the case with Estelle too. Now, moving on to other options here, a Precious Connection, just throwing out random things, because again, I think Estelle's artifact is probably her best in slot here, but there are other things to consider. Precious Connection does give you that same health boost at plus 30 for Estelle's artifact, but it also allows you to get 10 souls. Keep in mind that Estelle, her soul burn to reduce cooldowns by 2 turns is on a 10 soul burn. So you can actually use Genesis Raz's artifact here, a Precious Connection, for her. She'll get 10 souls and then 10 souls on next turn. Keep in mind that when she uses her passive ability, right, to get the barrier and everything for the team, that gives the team 10 souls as well, so she could actually be a pretty decent soul generator for your units, right? So when they take a turn, then they can actually do some more shenanigans, gives them more utility. 3F is definitely something that will come to mind. People are definitely going to be considering 3F as an option, right? She already has a built-in type of Aureus ability on her. Why not throw in 3F so that when you're doing counterattacks, when you're doing all this with a high HP build, like in the preview, I think she had 34,000 health, right? 3F going to be massive in terms of damage output, especially because she's pretty consistent with her counterattacks when she is defending like your team. Holy Sacrifice is definitely another thing that can be used here, because when she goes down, she'll revive. Her passive's still going to be in effect, and you can still soak up a bunch of damage for your team. Now, if you're building her on counter sets and stuff, I don't really think you need to run Elbrus Ritual Sword on her. It is something that you could do. I think most people are going to be focusing her down rather than her teammates, because focusing her teammates down is the easiest way to get her to continue proccing her skills, and that's probably not what they want, right? But yeah, those are just some options for you guys there to consider. Do let me know what you think of running on her. I'm probably going to stick her on her own artifact for Anti-Cleave purposes, and if we really need to, if we're trying to use her more bruiser applications, maybe we'll throw 3F or something else on her to test it out. So I did mention this a little bit in passing earlier, but let's formalize the occasion here and talk about some gear sets that you can consider running on her. The fact that she gains 35% combat readiness upon proc of her full fighting spirit, right? If you get a couple counters in against your opponent, then speed set could actually be an option. Her base speed is relatively low, right? 104, whatever it was, but 35% combat readiness is also quite a bit, and so with enough speed, you could potentially jump up and take a turn before your opponent does in certain circumstances, right? Maybe not if they're full bridging, cleaving into you and everything, but speed set can be a consideration. If her damage multipliers are really good, right? Then Destruction set might actually be another really good set to use on her, because Destruction gives you basically a free crit damage necklace, right? Ton of crit damage onto your team, and the fact that she doesn't need crit rate, but in the case that her multipliers scale well with crit damage, then Destruction set could be huge value, especially if you don't need her super fast, right, on a speed set or anything like that. Of course, counter set is something else that you want to consider. If you want more chances to counter, not just through her passive ability, then counter set is probably the way to go, right, for inherently counterattacking, especially if opponents are going to be focusing down her instead of her teammates. Having counter set just punishes your opponent, right, more for trying to zero in on her, but she's doing her job if that's the case. And of course, when it comes to two set pieces with a slow unit, you typically want immunity set. If you're going up against things like Shepherd of the Dark DN and you're trying to run her as an Anti-Cleave unit, you really don't want to get sealed. I know you're probably going to get the immunity stripped, but there is a chance to 15%, 2 chances to 15%, and that is really all you need, right? You stack up as much RNG as you can in those circumstances. But in the case where you just want a ton of HP, health set is definitely a reliable choice to have on her. I'm not certain how well her damage is going to be scaling, but I don't really think anyone is going to be using something like a penetration set and stuff. She already penetrates with her skill 3, but keep in mind her skill 1, which you're going to be counterattacking with, doesn't have natural penetration, so you could add that to the list of something to consider putting on her. I wouldn't recommend something like protection set, just for the fact that she already gives consistent barriers to the team if your teammates are getting focused down, but that's quite a variety to her build already. So let's go ahead and jump into a couple of sample builds that I prepared for you guys to see. We're going to use Albedo as the basis here because she shares the exact same stat lines here, and she doesn't actually have any additional stats that she gets from her skills or anything, or her passives, which makes her a perfect unit for comparison here, right? We're going to be running a plus 30 artifact just to make sure we get all these extra bonus stats to show you what a full power Estelle could potentially look like here. We're going to take away the imprints as well, just to give you a fair comparison in terms of stats, assuming you don't get any additional imprints too, right? And so looking at this build here, we're gonna be basically sitting at, assuming her artifacts at plus 30, you get 10% extra health. The 10% extra health takes whatever your total stat line here is, and then gives you 10% on top of that, right? So I'd get a bonus 2,700 HP, which pretty much puts me at 30k health, right? So with 30k HP and 200 speed, we also have a bunch of crit damage, about 300 crit damage. Again, not sure how the multipliers are going to play out here in terms of her damage, but we got her on speed and immunity. If you're wondering why we're trying to hit this 200 speed threshold, is because if you have a 35% combat readiness push, you only need to be about 202 speed to cut to go after a 310 speed unit goes. Now, I know you have to counterattack twice to get that fighting spirit to go, but keep in mind that you could run her with a unit like Freerin, and Freerin does give extra fighting spirit at the start of the match. So with that amount, you only need one counter for your Estelle to potentially take the turn and then go and potentially do some shenanigans there, right? Not that she can one-shot your opponent's entire team or anything, but hey, she can take a turn and she can use her skills, potentially knocking out like one of your opponent's units, again, assuming that your damage scaling is decent, right? But this is just throwing out one potential build. Let's take a look at some others. So next up on the list here is going to be a destruction build with immunity as well. Again, same artifact setup here, assuming we get the 10% health here. Getting additional 2,800 brings you to almost 31k HP. We lowered the speed, obviously, because we're on a destruction set. You could still pull off about a 200 speed unit. You'd sacrifice some defense maybe some damage here, which is fine. You can pretty much pull off the same speed set I just did earlier with the destruction set, right? If you get enough speed rolls on these destruction pieces. But this is something that you could potentially consider too. A little bit lower speed, right? Maybe not too keen on cutting, don't really care about that. Just want her to be a solid anti-cleave unit with some good damage to boot. 31k HP on almost 350 crit damage is pretty solid. Of course, a few things in these stat lines can be modded out here too to optimize flow, but these are gears that belong to other units at the moment, so I don't want to do that. But yeah, the destruction build I think is also okay. And here's our last sample build here for you guys to take a look at. Counter with immunity, keeping the same, artifact on her here. Assuming you get 10% HP, she'll be about 30k health right here as well, with decent defense, right? Middling defense, 1400. Her speed is going to be relatively low because we are on a triple HP main set side here. Not that you have to do this, you just want to get some similar stat lines. Again, you can potentially drop crit damage in all of these builds if you want to. It's not necessary. You can just go for the 100% crit rate with her ability to always crit naturally, and then not have much crit damage. She doesn't need to do damage, right? She heals scaling based on her own max HP and stuff, not by the amount of damage dealt. It just seems like she is a damage dealer, so I'm putting some form of crit damage in here, right? But otherwise, yeah, I think this is a decent build. You do want a little bit of speed. I don't know if base speed Estelle is the way to go. Maybe it is later down the line, who knows, but as of right now, I think you do want some form of speed to synergize with her combat readiness gain, and you do want some crit damage to synergize with her ability to always crit. It does make her a little bit more stat hungry than you'd like in most cases, but again, if you want to stack just HP and forego like the damage and anything, you could potentially do that as well. So in terms of potential team compositions to run her in, she is definitely more catered towards a slower playstyle, right? Unlike some units like Lady of the Scales, who can be both used aggressively and defensively, Estelle here is mostly just a defensive unit, both to protect her team and herself, right? She does grant some healing, some barriers, and she seems pretty resilient on the battlefield. So up against really fast aggressive teams, like for example the Rinnoc there on the other side, or any potential cleave units, cleave setups, like the Shepherd of the Dark DN on this side, she can punish teams that deal a ton of damage to her allies, right? Now keep in mind that this is a very ideal showcase here in that Schneel gave her immunity before the DN attacked, which is not usually the case. DN typically will strip you and she will ignore res and seal you, and Estelle, when she's sealed, won't really be doing as much as she would if she wasn't, right? So do keep these little caveats here. It's not that she's good into Shepherd of the Dark DN, it's that she's good into damage dealers, particularly AoE damage dealers, or high burst damage dealers, like Rinnoc, for example. But she is overly reliant on things like Fighting Spirit, so if your opponent is running things like ML Politis, or even an Elvira, they can completely shut her Fighting Spirit gain down, basically not letting her use her additional skill on her skill 1, right? The ability to give barriers and stuff to the team and push up her combat readiness. Yeah, that's all really Fighting Spirit reliant. But the good thing is, if she is sealed, she does have the ability to proc this, because again, it is attached to her skill 1 here, and so you still will get barriers and stuff. Just be careful, because the most common unit that you'll see to seal slower teams like this is New Moon Luna, and New Moon Luna being able to deal a ton of debuffs to your team is definitely going to be really crippling, right? So if you do pair her though, since she is a damage mitigation unit, with things like Bellion, with things like Soul Weavers, I think she can become rather degenerate rather quickly. Definitely don't overlook her just because her artifact is really good and can pair well with Lady of the Scales, right? Who I think she can also pair decently well with. Yeah, her damage is definitely, from what I can see here, nothing to scoff at. it's dealing decent damage, especially when she's using the skill not on her own turn, and when she's doing counterattacks and stuff, right? So again, Counter might be a viable set here. We don't know the optimal speed. I know you don't have to run her super fast, but yeah, it seems like she's gonna be a pretty decent addition to us turn 2 players, and she's gonna find a place right at home next to Perfumer Bibulus for me. But with that being said though, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.